Good afternoon, everybody. I see they're allowing me to start early today. I apologize to my audience for the blazer and the hat, but water is out of my apartment and this hair had no place in civilized society.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, no, it's bad. Today is a special day. It's Friday, it's lunchtime, and it's time for your weekly dose of Future Law Bootcamp. I'm your host, Joe Borstein, CEO of Lex Fusion and a general total freak about the world of legal innovation. As always, on Future Law, we're going to discuss the tectonic forces bubbling under the $800 billion legal industry, globalization, automation, and of course, the changing regulatory environment, which is turning over the status quo all over the world, allowing new entrants in, and outside investment, which is a huge topic. But today, my guest, who you may know, is Vanessa Davis, VP of Workflow Products at LaTerra, our very gracious host for this show. She spent the better part of her career at LegalZoom, the fantastic legal technology company, where she ended her journey as a VP of Research and Product Development. That is certainly a company that has changed the space, and we'd like to talk about, but also she is a Yale Law grad. You might have heard of it. It's a pretty decent law school, and I'm really excited to dig today and learn a little bit more about her. I've actually known her now for a few months, but I have not asked any of these questions because I wanted everyone to share in my knowledge. So welcome, Vanessa.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm on the edge of my seat to figure out what these questions are.
Well, it's going to be very exciing, and
sure,
they're going to be hard. And,
oh no!
I expect this to be a struggle for them.
Okay, good. I was hoping to have some contention. Like
the experience overall should be terrible.
Okay, good.
Let's just kick this off. You started at Yale Law after Dartmouth, a very traditional, extremely high-end legal background. Talk about that. Talk about your first couple of years as a practicing attorney.
So I graduated from Yale Law School, and it turns out when you graduate law school, you're a lawyer. Well, you have to pass the bar. But so
I think for an interview, I think we'll cut it there.
No, it's good. I'm here to bring insight. No, here's the thing is, so I think it was Scott Turow. No, I think it was something like that, where he described law school as the great American postgraduate babysitter, which to a certain extent is true, right? Like if you have a specific subject matter expertise, you take the GRE, you don't take the LSAT. So there's a lot of people in law school who aren't quite sure what they're doing there, or that was my experience. I think this idea of becoming a lawyer, it sounds sort of obvious. It was kind of a joke, but it's sort of not, because, at the end of law school, you expect there to be some sort of revelation, right? Like that, like, now I understand, now I know what I'm doing. But instead, everyone is kind of funneled, at the law schools we're talking about, everyone is funneled into, the interviews for the big law firms, and you go and, whatever weird on-campus process you have for that. And it was weird. and that's the path that is kind of expected, right? So I did that. I don't know that I had any particular idea of what was going to happen, but I did that. I ended up at O'Melveny, which was a great firm. Yep. Yeah. So, I had the summer experience, which, isn't meant to mirror the actual experience. It's supposed to be, summer camp
almost the polar opposite.
Yeah. Exactly. I'm like, this is great. Like I gained like 20 pounds, I saw every concert I wanted to. And then you're there and you're like, wait, what is it that I'm doing? And what it is that I was doing was what everybody kind of experiences, which is this, that's my son in the background waiting for his class to start. Sure. So the experience is, right, like somebody tells you, I started off in litigation, and my first, big project was doc review, and somebody told me, well, see if you see anything unusual, which, for like a first year associate, you're like, it all seems kind of weird to me.
Yeah. I think it's unusual that I'm reviewing another human being's emails for 12 hours a day.
Right,
the
exactly.
The experience is highly unusual.
I don't know what I'm doing. What am I looking for? I'm like, that seems bad. I got sent to North Carolina, I think, to sit in a warehouse and review, documents. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. So yeah, it was weird. I don't know what I was expecting. It's just, that wasn't it. I didn't know what I was doing. And I felt like I wasn't learning how to practice law. That's not the fault of O'Melveny. I just, maybe I had the wrong idea of what it was. So I was like, maybe it's the size of the law firm. So then I went to a boutique bankruptcy law firm called LexFusion. And, it ended up being, not their fault. It's probably a mismatch of expectations on my part. I didn't really know what the practice of law was about. And I wasn't, I'm sure it's a surprise to everyone. Like, I wasn't enjoying myself. Yeah. This isn't as fun as I thought it would be. So I didn't feel like I was, it's inchoate, right? Like, I don't know what I was looking for, but it wasn't there.
Important question. Did you enjoy studying the law in law school?
You know what I did? Yes and no. Some parts of it I did. That sort of the ones that were really rule based, I really did enjoy. And the much more philosophical ones, where we talked about ethics and not really. Yeah, no, the why of it all, right? The sort of, this is amazing. This is so interesting. Ethics in healthcare. What's that? How do we apply legal ethics in healthcare? I thought that was fascinating. And then, it comes down to it, and you're literally paging through stacks and stacks of documents, and you're like, well, this isn't that great. It sounds sort of like I'm a prima donna, right? Like, I'm like, I understood that there'd be constitutional questions I'd be called upon to engage with, because everyone wants a first year engaging with that, right? Like, you come in your 20s, you're like, I have some ideas, and the partner who's been there for 50 years is like, yeah, thanks very much for your ideas.
I think I could have done it better. Nobody.
I know, great idea. I saw Hamilton,
I memorized some of the songs. So that's, again, we've never talked about that, but there's a very similar experience that I had. I didn't believe I was going to handle constitutional questions because, I have some self-awareness, but I did.
We're talking about my narcissism right now.
That's right. That's a subtopic.
Yes.
But I did get thrust into document review, in the early days of electronic discovery. And I think you are saying something profound, because there was, for generations, it was an apprentice system where basically once you graduated, everyone knew you knew nothing, but you sat alongside somebody that knew something.
Right.
Then e-discovery hit, which went from kind of, discovery was always a part of litigation. But my dad, who's an 82-year-old litigator, tells me about his legendary class action case where he had 20,000 documents. He worked on it for years, and it's just nothing. It just doesn't compare. So you had an apprentice system, to me, in the early 2000s, which was inherently broken because nobody up the chain had absolutely any. It's not that you didn't know. It's that the person that said, and I liked your quote, go see if you find anything unusual. They had no idea what you were doing either, probably, because times have changed and changed fast. And I think that's an interesting segue to you at some point. And I don't know if we went over every moment of your practicing law history, but I think they got the idea.
Yeah, short enough.
Moving on. How did you find your way into the world of legal technology and into the world you're in now?
Yeah, no. So I left CLE, and I had no idea what I was doing. I'm a little older than you, so it was, we weren't quite doing e-discovery. In fact, it was controversial to be sending out stuff via email. So it's, I was lost. I was looking for something to do, and a friend of a friend actually was working at a company called Fine Legal Forms, still around. And he knew that my last practice had been bankruptcy law. And he said, we're doing stuff for consumers. Do you want to help, kind of write instructional guides for consumers? So this was before any automation was available. Fine Legal Forms was putting forms on websites and being like, you can download it. And that was pretty novel. It was centralizing all the information in one place. So that was a big deal. And I was
more
like,
of a CAM.
Right?
Enabled CAM, but yeah, fantastic.
it was still, these forms were hard to find at the time. The states weren't doing anything to make them available. The government wasn't doing anything to make them available. So just having them in one place and instructing people how to use them was a big deal. And I actually really connected with that. I was an English major, hard to believe. So I'm like, oh, I'm expressing myself. God, I sound terrible. I'm like, I'm writing these instructional guides and I'm explaining things to the people. And it felt more connected than, representing banks or representing, these enormous companies, which are obviously, comprise people, not they comprise people, people comprise them. An English major. But yeah, no. So it felt, I don't know, it felt better, right? It felt like, oh, I get this, right? Laws explaining things, like we have knowledge, we're explaining it to people that don't have that same knowledge. Like this is cool. It's sort of making things accessible. And I connected with that. It was challenging to do. Finding those forms was challenging at that time. But it felt good to do.
And you were solving a problem at scale, right? You were, instead of, mentoring, one lawyer as to how to find these things, you were able to create a system whereby, in theory, the entire world of lawyers looking for that same thing could reduce their turn times and be a better lawyer.
Well, it actually wasn't for lawyers. It was consumer facing.
Okay.
So it was, so I was explaining kind of consumer problems to consumers. So it was, I keep going back and forth in particularly my legal tech career in between doing consumer facing legal tech and lawyer facing legal tech. Immediately after Fine Legal Forms, I went to a company called Smart Rules, which was a subscription site for lawyers, right? I
used it myself. Yeah, it was really
You did? No, it was cool, right?
It was.
So it's still around. It's for those who don't know, it's a subscription site for lawyers where you get local rules and judges rules for practicing for if you're filing in a jurisdiction outside of the one you normally do. It was a way to centralize all the rules in a single place. So again, this was at a time where not all that stuff was available. And if you look now, a lot of the stuff is still not well available, particularly in smaller jurisdictions, right? Los Angeles County publishes most of its judges rules on the website, but still it's not that easy. And I didn't even know, when I started practicing, I didn't know that like, oh, there's like local rules and judges rules. Like that's crazy, right? Absolutely. And they contradict each other. That's like the part where it's like, oh, no, this has to be on this color paper. Otherwise you're SOL.
And frankly, when you're junior, it's that sort of attention to detail that often is what you're judged on, while simultaneously is a thing like you said outside of your jurisdiction, even in your jurisdiction, like like you're lucky to go through 2 or 3 rounds of these processes in your first 3 years, especially if you're working at a big firm, like O'Melveny or like Kasowitz, where you're working on big cases that take years. So the myth that there is this experience period where you're going through the pain a few times and I think pain leads to learning is really not true. It's just not happening. Like sometimes you're a third year and this is the first time you've ever looked at something like this. So yeah, that's interesting. And
just you say that reminded me of this of a time at O'Melveny where the way you find out about stuff is by somebody being like, did you blah, blah, blah. Like somebody asked me, oh, did you file a notice of appearance in, at the time it passed. And I was like, did not know I was supposed to do that. We'll get right on it.
Sort of automated notice when you walk in the door?
Right. Notice of appearance. Yeah, on it. But interesting, like here I am. Here's your notice. I don't know, what's it supposed to look like? The person that saved me more times than not at O'Melveny was my secretary. I had one of the best secretaries. She was older and she, she didn't have, she knew her stuff. She didn't have a ton of time for me because she also had, a couple partners on her that she was working for. But she would come in and be like, I don't think you meant to do this. I think you meant, and I'd be like, oh, okay. And that kind of knowledge, that kind of support is invaluable, but
huge.
So to the extent that you can bottle it, you can productize it. That's really key.
So one of my favorite, and then you moved on to LegalZoom, which I want to talk about. One of my favorite quotes that I think resonates with lawyers in particular is Peter Diamandis, who's a futurist, says, if you want to make $1 billion, find a way to help 1 billion people. And I think that especially lawyers who the traditional practice of law is helping people one at a time. And I never mean to demean that. That's incredibly important. It makes our system work, and it's a fantastic career and very intellectually stimulating. But there is something that I think the lore of technology and LegalZoom in particular, everybody has legal needs. Everybody, wants to do things. I think most people, if not everybody, would like to do things right if they had the right price point. LegalZoom sought, and I think pretty successfully, fills some of those needs, allowing kind of the kind of daily legal tasks that we go through as individuals to be like writing a will to be at least partially automated. What was that experience like? You spent 12 years there.
I did. It was, and I still think about it fondly. There's a lot of really smart people there who are trying to do stuff that people didn't think to do before, right? I had friends that were starting businesses. I know a lot of people, I won't even ask you if you have a will or a trust, right? Because it's one of those things where people are kind of like, ugh, it sounds hard. And when you start it, it brings up horrible questions, right? Because even in the LegalZoom questionnaire, it starts with sort of well, who do you want to get all your stuff when you die? And you're like, when I die? You mean if, if I die?
Obviously like it buried with me. I think that's the typical response.
Yeah, no, that's actually the default. So we try to default to the comment.
Obviously. But yeah,
no, but these are so, and then the more you talk to people about these things, it's nobody wants to confront this, right? Sure. Usually the time where it starts is when you have a child and you're kind of forced to confront something needs to happen with this person, how do I make sure this person is taken care of? When it's just your stuff, even if you're married, you can kind of push it off. You're like, well, I think that's the default anyway. They'll get everything. So I'm not going to worry about it. It's when you have a child that it starts to become, really important and, something that you can't just kind of push to the side. So working there really gives you a perspective on how many people need this. We faced obviously a lot of challenges from regulators over the years, lots and lots. But even among those regulators, there were a number of them who'd said, I actually use LegalZoom to create a will or to create a trust. It was great. They would say it immediately after kind of, reprimanding us for doing things that were the unauthorized practice of law, et cetera, et cetera. And then they would say, oh no, it turns out that when I needed this, it was really helpful to me. And that was always fascinating to me. Yeah. All these people that just sort of would behind closed doors tell you, oh, I actually did that.
No, and I'd love let's get to your time at LaTerra real quick. Then let's talk about the regulatory regime, because I actually everybody complains about lawyers don't like technology, and I don't think that that's true at all. I think we are stuck in a regulatory regime that makes the development of legal technology very difficult. And separated from the lawyers who can actually use it by design. So we'll put a pin in that. But
okay.
So you have recently joined LaTerra as the VP of Workflow Products.
It's Workspace products, which I think is an interesting distinction, actually.
Okay,
Workspace
well, let's talk
products.
about that. But let's even talk about for the lawyers out there that are interested in the business of law and legal technology. I think a lot of people don't even know, what does that mean? What does a VP of sitting over certain products mean? What does it mean for your day-to-day? What are you in charge of?
So my purview is strategy, right? So it sits above a group of product managers who are in charge of a lot of the day-to-day decisions about moving the product forward. And that includes, problems with the product, but also, how do we prioritize this feature over that feature? How do we get customer feedback? How do we get market feedback on what's important to a large group of people? And working with designers to determine, how do we represent this? How do we make this look in a way that's usable, right? Not just like any kind of B2B product where it's a grind to get through, but how do we make it exciting and enjoyable to use?
Yep.
But yeah, my goal is to pick out the vision for the products, 1 to 3 years in the future, and figure out how how to push us that direction.
So if somebody's using a LaTerra product, LaTerra Litigate, former Allegory, and they want to know who should they really be talking to? If they that person is you, and they should call you at home anytime. Is that?
Well, I don't have a home phone, and I never leave home. So yeah, I guess I'm in quarantine. I don't know about you, Joe. I don't know what it's like in New York.
I'm out there swinging. Yeah.
I'm in the Bay Area, so we don't do anything.
As I sit in my house with a blazer on, it's pathetic.
Yes, exactly.
So that's really interesting. So let's touch on this regulatory regime. So
okay.
LaTerra, obviously, one of my member companies is the CEO of Lex Fusion, but a company I deeply believe in building workflow products and desktop products. I think you were going to explain the difference.
No, I said workspace products because it's funny. I was hired and it was workflow, and then the decision was made workspace, and it's sort of interesting. I think it's interesting that they chose that, right? Because workflow implies a very specific process, right? That it goes from point A to point B. And changing it to workspace, I think, is interesting, particularly in light of the Allegory acquisition and making it litigate, because all of the conversations I've had with litigators recently, they all talk about the fact every case is its own country, right? Everything is different. You never know what's going to happen. You kind of can't plan for process, which I would push back on that, no matter, but I think it's interesting that we're calling it workspace now, and kind of to say, well, you can make your own process, right? You can drive your own path. That's not an expression. You can create your own. Yes. You can drive on your own road. Blaze, that's the one. Blaze. You can blaze your own path. Thank you. Although
it's a thing.
I was going to say it sounds right, but actually that makes no sense. How do you do that? I think that sounds farmery, which we know you have a specific affinity for. Sure. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting because calling it workspace, and then of course, chaos erupts behind me. Calling it workspace allows for the opportunity for people to create their own path. And I just use the same expression again, create their own path in what they want to do. Mm-hmm. But, to say lawyers don't have process ignores that they do. They do the same things often in the same order over and over again. Now, whether or not it's a good process or whether or not it's the right process is a separate question, but obviously.
Or a recorded process in any way.
Or a recorded process or an acknowledged process, right? My son is very angry. So this is the joy of being at home, right?
Well, he's very process driven. So there's a lack of process.
He actually is very process driven. It's funny. He likes his routines. He hates disruption from his routines. So maybe that's a good example. Maybe he also likes to argue. So future lawyer indeed.
Yeah, future lawyer indeed. So let's talk about. Let's move on to the regulatory regime. So yeah. So I think most lawyers know this, but it's not an intuitive thing. You cannot share profits if you're practicing law. You cannot share your profits in the U.S. with non-lawyers, and non-lawyers include lawyers who aren't actively practicing. So
right. Not only that, in many cases, it includes. The reason, and I don't know if a lot of people know this, maybe they do, is that lawyers historically have not taken credit cards is because the idea was that there's a third party involved in the transaction and they might have some influence over the representation, which obviously that's preposterous. In the face of Visa and American Express influencing your, even $10,000 representation, they don't care, right? They want their money. But that was the reason historically lawyers have not taken credit cards. So this is read very narrowly, these kind of rules. So what that's meant, there's a couple different things that were restricting LegalZoom in moving forward. One of them was what you said, there's the corporate practice of law, right? That if a corporation has lawyers working for it, those lawyers can only represent that corporation. They can't represent outside individuals. Law firms are organized as partnerships. Those kind of organizations can represent outside individuals. So LegalZoom couldn't have lawyers working for it that represent customers, for example. So they had independent contractors with which they are associated who did that kind of representation. Yep. Now that scheme, that's different in the UK. And so LegalZoom actually owns a law firm in the UK and is organizing it.
It's actually untrue in most of the first world economies.
Right, that's true.
The vast majority, you can have non-lawyer ownership. So the U.S. is truly an exception in this space. And, you know, I think, to me, it's interesting for two reasons. One, it impacts the ability to get investment, because you can't, while you can create great products, you cannot close the loop and fully service the client, because you can't give legal advice. It also, I think, horribly prevents lawyers from partnering with technologists, business people, and other people that could add tremendous value to their practice, liquidate some of their future earnings into, you know, stock price and things like that. I mean, if you look at the banks, are not totally dissimilar from law firms in that they used to all be partnership models. And then they like, including Goldman Sachs, and they still call them partners, and they went public, and, you know, the partners made absolutely ludicrous amounts of money, even though they made a ton of money before. And Goldman Sachs continues to be a fantastic brand name bank. I think that eludes the way it actually holds back individual lawyers. I mean, all the big firms could probably turn into monstrous corporations because they're incredibly profitable. And to add a lot of liquidity to also then innovate, because once you have liquidity and you can issue stock and issue bonds, you can plan further for the future. And, you know, create workflow tools that are right and proper for you. So we only have 5 minutes left. I don't think we're going to resolve the regulatory issue.
You don't think so?
I mean,
well,
we need 10 more minutes. But
you're on track.
I'd like to leave with kind of a few questions about where you see the future going at the confluence of technology and practice, and any advice you'd give to lawyers out there that kind of want to get some exposure to this world of legal technology.
That's a big question.
Totally fun question. Terrible question asking. I'm not a good interviewer.
I'm not even sure which one to start with. So it's interesting because a lot of the innovation that you can see in, you know, for lawyers practicing has come in the transactional space. And I think that's because there's not this sort of outside group sitting outside, right? Innovation is a little bit stifled once you have the court system involved. You know, you can innovate as much as you want on what a contract looks like. I mean, people aren't, but you can, right? But it doesn't, as long as the two parties agree, it doesn't really matter. But once you're submitting something to a court, no, you're limited, right? It has to be
a break on the potential.
Right, exactly. Right. You have a third party that's always going to be a part of this, and and so they're gonna resist. You know, like there are still plenty of places where you are required to print on a specific color of paper. It's not even just like green. It's sort of like it's like soft green. And you're like, what is the purpose of that? You know, what are you doing? And I can't tell if it's, you know, I guess in law school, they used to call it a trap for the unwary. Although my law school roommate used to say, aren't all traps for the unwary? Which I always thought was funny.
That's pretty good.
She's a law professor now, so you know she's got some smarts. But I always think about that. But yeah, no, that's the purpose of that is to catch people, right? But once you have that kind of thing, so again, the screaming starts because school's about to start. But you know, I think so. There's outside of e-discovery, there's not been a ton of legal startups that have entered the sphere, right? For litigation. So I think that's where a lot of opportunity lies, as long as people are willing to kind of dig in. I forgot the second part. It seemed to be something about
so
advice.
if you're a lawyer or a law student and you're interested in kind of either utilizing the best that's out there in legal technology or kind of getting involved in what I think is going to be a huge booming economy for the next at least few decades of
Yeah.
legal tech, legal innovation. It's not just technology; it's workflows, it's globalization, it's finance, it's litigation finance, and law finance. How would you start? You're somebody that broke into it, has now had a really successful career. What should they do?
Well, I think going, and now actually weirdly with COVID, it's no better time is to attend some conferences, right? They're priced better than they ever have been. Clio came in, I think, at $99 this year, which was amazing. You don't have to travel for it. You can get a good sense of who the major players are pretty quickly. Legal tech has boomed in the past couple of years. It used to be there were a couple hundred companies, now according to almost every list, there's thousands. So it's harder to get your hands around them, but going to these conferences let you see who the big players are, and reach out to people. It's like faintly embarrassing. I'm horrible at stuff like that, but guess who's available on Twitter? Literally everyone. Legal tech, I know, me too. I don't really post that much, but yeah, I'm willing to talk to people. It's people, I found like law tech Twitter to be incredibly friendly and open.
Agreed. Yeah. It's a great community.
So even just start with that, and you'll have a pretty good leg up on getting involved in legal tech.
Yeah. Well, look, thanks, Vanessa. I hope this was a really unpleasant kind of root canal-like experience. That's what we go for every week, and it's the end of Future Law for the week. Everyone have a fantastic holiday, and we're I think starting up in the new year. So happy holidays, everybody.
Happy holidays.
Thanks, Vanessa.
Thank you.